The bank manager told me my wife was standing in their downtown Chicago branch with a man who had my face, and they were trying to drain my retirement account. My name is Nathan Briggs. I'm 51 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I thought I understood my life. I'd built a financial consulting firm from nothing, survived a brutal divorce in my 30s, and finally found peace again 5 years ago when I met Avery at a bookstore in Lincoln Park. She was 37, beautiful in that effortless way, and she made me believe in second chances. Every morning she brought coffee to my home office. Every evening she asked about my day like she actually cared. The call came at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah from National Bank had managed my accounts for nearly a decade, and I'd never heard her voice shake before. She asked if I was at my office. When I confirmed, she went silent for 3 full seconds. Then she explained that my wife was in their Loop branch right now, accompanied by a man who appeared to be my identical twin, and they were attempting to access my private retirement fund. I laughed. It was the kind of nervous laugh that comes when reality stops making sense. I told Sarah that Avery was in Springfield visiting her terminally ill mother just like she did twice a week for the past 2 years. But Sarah's voice didn't change. She begged me to come downtown immediately. That 15-minute taxi ride felt like drowning in slow motion. What I found when I walked into that bank would prove that the woman sleeping beside me for 5 years had been studying how to erase me from existence. Sarah met me in the lobby, her professional composure barely hiding the alarm in her eyes. She guided me to a private conference room that smelled of leather and recycled air. On the table lay a photocopy of a driver's license. The name read Nathan Alexander Briggs. My name, my birth date, but the photograph made my stomach drop. The man in that picture had my jawline, my haircut, even the slight asymmetry in my left eyebrow from a childhood scar. He wore the same style of navy polo shirt I preferred. It was like staring at a mirror image that had somehow escaped the glass and started living its own life. Sarah explained that the woman I'd married had walked into the branch an hour earlier with this man, presenting themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Briggs seeking to liquidate our retirement account for what she claimed were urgent medical expenses. The account held $230,000. Sarah had stalled them by requesting additional verification documents, giving them an appointment to return in 3 days. She'd called me the moment they left. She handed me a thick folder containing transaction records from the past 18 months. I'd never looked at them closely before, trusting Avery to manage our household finances while I focused on my consulting firm. Now, sitting in that sterile conference room, I traced the pattern with my finger. $500 here, $1,000 there. Consistent withdrawals every time I traveled to New York or Seattle for client meetings. The amounts were always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts. My throat tightened. Avery had been telling me these were medical expenses for her mother's cancer treatment. She'd shown me hospital bills, prescription receipts, even a letter from someone she claimed was Dr. Robert Miller, the oncologist. I'd never questioned any of it. Why would I? You don't investigate the woman who holds your hand during dinner and whispers that she loves you before falling asleep. The withdrawals totaled almost $43,000 over 18 months. Every cent extracted during my business trips, when I was too busy managing mergers and acquisitions to notice my own life being dismantled. I drove home to Oak Park in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Our house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave to each other and leave their porch lights on. I'd bought this house thinking it would be our forever home. Now it felt like enemy territory. Inside, I moved through rooms that suddenly looked different. The photos on the mantel showing our wedding day, our vacation to Colorado, her smile that always seemed so genuine. Had any of it been real? I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my chest tight, with something between rage and grief. The walk-in closet held my suits on the left, her dresses on the right. I pushed past my winter coats to the back corner where we stored off-season items. Behind a plastic bin of Christmas decorations, I found a gray wool sweater and a pair of jeans. They weren't mine, but they were exactly my size, exactly my style, exactly what I would choose if I were buying clothes for myself. Someone had been practicing being me in my own house, wearing clothes that matched mine, learning my mannerisms, my preferences, my patterns. I heard Avery's car pull into the driveway at 6:30, right on schedule. She always arrived precisely at 6:30 on Tuesdays. The front door opened. Her keys hit the entry table with that familiar clink. Her voice called out asking how my day went, that same cheerful tone I'd heard 1,000 times before. I was sitting in the kitchen with a gray sweater spread across the table in front of me. She walked in smiling, and I realized I'd been living with a stranger who'd memorized every detail of how to destroy me. Avery froze when she saw the sweater, just for a fraction of a second, but I'd spent 5 years studying this woman's face, and I caught it. That microscopic hesitation before her expression reset to concerned confusion. She asked what was wrong, why I'd pulled old clothes from the closet if I was feeling all right. I kept my voice level, almost casual. I asked how her mother was doing and whether Dr. Miller had adjusted her medication. She answered automatically, saying her mother was having a difficult week and the doctor had added a new pain management protocol. Her response was smooth, practiced, exactly what someone would say if they'd rehearsed this conversation dozens of times. Then I mentioned I'd called our insurance company that afternoon to inquire about adding additional coverage for her mother's care. I watched her face as I explained that the representative had informed me her mother's policy had been canceled 7 months ago due to non-payment. No active treatment. No Dr. Miller listed in their network. No hospital bills submitted for the past 14 months. The mask didn't crack completely, but I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She claimed there must have been an administrative error, that she'd been paying the premiums directly to avoid the insurance hassle, that I must have confused the details. Her explanation came quickly, too quickly, each word tumbling over the next. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said we should sort it out together in the morning. She kissed my cheek before heading upstairs, and I felt nothing. That kiss that used to make me smile now felt like a predator marking its territory. After she went to bed, I spent 4 hours in my home office with the door locked. I started with her phone records, which I could access through our shared family plan. The number she claimed belonged to Dr. Miller's office appeared repeatedly, but when I reverse searched it, the listing came back to a prepaid burner phone activated 2 years ago. The Springfield hospital she supposedly visited twice weekly had no record of her mother as a patient. In fact, when I dug deeper into public records, I discovered her mother had died 9 years ago in Tucson. The woman I married had been visiting someone in Springfield, but it wasn't her dying mother. I found her personal laptop in her craft room, the space she claimed to use for scrapbooking. The password was easy to guess because I'd watched her type it 100 times. What I found made my blood run cold. Folders, dozens of them, organized by year and month like some kind of twisted corporate project. Bank statements showing my account balances, screenshots of my emails to clients, photos of me leaving for work, arriving home, meeting friends for dinner. She'd been documenting my life with the precision of someone conducting surveillance. One folder was labeled simply Timeline. I opened it. Month 1 through 3, Establish trust and emotional dependence. Month 4 through 12, Integrate into financial systems and social circles. Month 13 through 18, Implement medical expense narrative. Month 19 through 24, Increase extraction amounts while maintaining plausibility. Month 25, Execute final transfer and contingency protocol. My hand shook as I scrolled to a subfolder marked Contingency Plan. Inside was a single document, a handwritten note in Avery's precise cursive. It outlined a hunting trip to Wisconsin that she'd been encouraging me to take next month with some business associates. She'd already booked a remote cabin. The note detailed how I would die in an accidental shooting during a gun-cleaning mishap. The witness would be Julian, who would pose as a hunting guide. Avery would receive the condolences as my grieving widow and collect my $500,000 life insurance policy. They weren't just stealing my money. They'd been planning my murder for months, timing it perfectly to the moment when my accounts would be completely drained and my life insurance fully vested. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, understanding that my wife had married me specifically to kill me, and I'd been sleeping next to my assassin every night for 5 years. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound in the house made me wonder if this was the moment she'd deviate from her timeline and decide I'd become too dangerous to keep alive. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, listening to her breathe beside me, this stranger wearing my wife's face. When morning came, I made breakfast like always. I asked about her plans for the day like always. I kissed her goodbye at the door like always. Then I called an old friend from my Navy days, Marcus Chen, who'd become a private investigator after leaving military intelligence. Marcus arrived at my office within an hour. I showed him everything I'd found, speaking in a low voice, even though we were alone. He didn't show surprise or disbelief. He just took notes, photographed documents, and asked precise questions about Avery's routines and patterns. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and told me I wasn't the first person who'd shown him this exact scenario. He'd been tracking a pattern of financial fraud cases across the Midwest involving romantic partners who were actually professional grifters working in teams. In every case, the targets were financially stable men in their 40s and 50s, usually divorced or widowed, emotionally vulnerable and eager to trust again. The method was always the same: infiltrate, extract, eliminate. Marcus pulled up files on his laptop. 3 men, Robert in Boston, David in Denver, and Michael in Minneapolis. All dead within the past 6 years. All ruled accidental deaths. All had been married to women who disappeared within months of collecting life insurance payouts. He showed me their photos. The resemblance was eerie. All three men were similar ages, similar builds, similar coloring to me. We could have been brothers. Marcus explained that the grifters specifically targeted men who matched their physical profile because it made the impersonation element of their scheme more convincing. Then Marcus showed me a photo from Michael's case file, a grainy surveillance image captured at a bank in Minneapolis 3 weeks before Michael's death. The man in the photo was attempting to access Michael's accounts, presenting himself as Michael, with falsified identification. It was the same face from my bank security footage, the man who looked like me, Julian. Marcus explained that Julian was likely Avery's actual partner, possibly her brother or husband, and they'd been running this con for at least a decade. They would study their target for months before Avery made contact, learning everything about his personality, preferences, vulnerabilities. She'd engineer a meet-cute that seemed natural and coincidental. She'd become exactly the type of woman that specific man needed. Then, over years, they'd hollow him out financially before staging his death and moving on to the next city, the next name, the next victim. I was number 4 on their list, or maybe I was number 10 or 20. How many other men had believed Avery's smile was real? Marcus made a call to a federal agent he knew, someone who specialized in interstate fraud and conspiracy cases. Within 2 hours, FBI agent Laura Vance was sitting in my office, listening to the same story I'd just told Marcus. She didn't take notes by hand. She recorded everything, her expression neutral and professional. When I finished, she confirmed what Marcus had suspected. They'd been tracking a pair matching this pattern for 3 years, but had never been able to identify them or get ahead of their movements. The victims were always dead before anyone realized a crime had occurred, and the life insurance payouts were processed before investigators could freeze the assets. But I was still alive. I was the first target who discovered the plan before they could execute it. Agent Vance told me I could be the key to stopping them, but it would require me to be bait. The plan was simple and terrifying. I would continue my normal routine, pretending I suspected nothing, while the FBI set up surveillance and built their case. They needed to catch Avery and Julian in the act of attempting to access my accounts fraudulently, or better yet, attempting to harm me directly. Without concrete evidence of imminent danger, they couldn't arrest them for the deaths of the other men. Those cases were closed as accidents. But if they moved against me with federal agents watching, the entire conspiracy would unravel. I asked how long I'd have to maintain the charade. Agent Vance said it depended on when they made their move, but probably no more than 2 weeks. She'd have agents positioned around my house, my office, everywhere I went. I'd wear a wire. They'd monitor every communication. I agreed, because what choice did I have? I couldn't run. They'd just find another man who looked like me and trusted too easily. And I couldn't confront them without evidence, without protection, without knowing for certain that justice would be served. That evening, I went home to the woman who'd been planning my death, kissed her hello, and asked what she wanted for dinner, while an FBI recording device captured every word. The next 5 days were the most exhausting of my life. Every morning I woke up next to Avery and remembered that her hand on my chest was calculating how soon she'd be collecting insurance money. Every conversation required me to monitor my facial expressions, my tone, every micro-reaction that might signal I knew the truth. She asked if I was feeling all right. I'd been quiet lately, distracted, not myself. I blamed it on stress at work, a difficult client situation that was consuming my attention. She made sympathetic sounds and offered to cook my favorite meal. I thanked her and thought about how that same voice had written instructions for staging my death. Agent Vance checked in twice daily through encrypted messages. The FBI had established complete surveillance coverage of my house, my office, and Avery's movements. They'd identified Julian living under a false identity in a short-term rental in Springfield, exactly where Avery claimed to be visiting her mother twice weekly. Cell phone records confirmed they communicated constantly using encrypted apps, but the Bureau's tech team was working on breaking through. On day 3, Avery brought up the Wisconsin hunting trip again. She'd found this wonderful cabin, she said, perfect for me to unwind and disconnect from work stress. She'd even contacted a guide service to ensure I'd have expert supervision. The guide's name was Jack Morrison, and she'd already put down a deposit. I told her it sounded perfect. I watched her face light up with what looked like genuine pleasure, and I wondered if she ever felt anything real or if every expression was just another mask she'd practiced in the mirror. That night, while she slept, I went through her phone. The FBI had given me software to clone her device without her knowing. I found messages with someone listed only as J in her contacts. The messages were brief and coded, but their meaning was clear enough. Package inspection scheduled for final confirmation. Timeline acceleration approved. Contingency protocol readiness confirmed. They were talking about killing me in the language of a business transaction. Marcus discovered more evidence. He'd tracked down a woman in Boston who'd been Robert's neighbor. She remembered Robert's girlfriend had seemed distraught after his death, but she'd also noticed the girlfriend had sold Robert's car to a dealer just 3 days after the funeral, before the will had even gone through probate. She'd moved out of Robert's house within a week. For someone supposedly devastated by loss, she'd been remarkably efficient at liquidating assets. Marcus also found that the same encrypted email account had been used to book flights from Boston to Denver right after Robert's death, and from Denver to Minneapolis right after David's death. The pattern was undeniable. Kill the target, collect the insurance, disappear to the next city, find the next victim. On day 5, Avery received a phone call while I was in the shower. I heard her voice through the bathroom door, speaking quickly and urgently. When I came out, she was smiling, but her hands were shaking slightly. She said her mother had taken a sudden turn for the worse, and she needed to drive to Springfield immediately. I told her I understood and asked if she wanted me to come with her. She said no. It was better if I stayed focused on work, and she'd call with updates. She kissed me goodbye, and I watched through the window as she drove away, knowing she was going to meet Julian and discuss why their carefully planned timeline was being disrupted. Agent Vance called 30 seconds later. They were following her. They had Julian's location under surveillance. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Avery and Julian were going to meet face to face, discuss their concerns, maybe even revise their plan. The FBI recorded every word of their conversation in a Springfield coffee shop that afternoon. Avery told Julian I'd been acting strange, possibly suspicious. Julian responded that they should accelerate the timeline, move the Wisconsin trip up by 2 weeks, eliminate the risk before I could become a problem. Avery hesitated, saying it was too rushed, but Julian insisted. He reminded her about the other targets who'd gotten suspicious and how they'd had to improvise. He specifically mentioned David in Denver, how they'd staged a carbon monoxide accident when David started asking questions. He mentioned Michael in Minneapolis, whose brake lines they'd cut when he'd hired a private investigator. They spoke about murder the way other people discuss weekend plans. Agent Vance called me that evening and said they had everything they needed to make arrests, but they wanted to catch them in the final act, let them reveal their full criminal intent so no lawyer could claim it was just talk or fantasy. Agent Vance laid out the endgame strategy in my office the next morning. The FBI had enough evidence to arrest Avery and Julian for conspiracy to commit fraud and potentially for the murders of the 3 previous victims, but she wanted something airtight. She wanted them to reveal their full intent on camera, with weapons, with undeniable proof of their plan to kill me. The Wisconsin hunting trip would be the perfect trap. I would go ahead with the reservation, bring Julian along as the guide Avery had arranged, and let them make their move. The FBI would have the entire cabin wired with surveillance equipment. Agents would be positioned throughout the surrounding woods. The moment Julian pulled a weapon, they'd move in. But I had a different idea, something riskier, but something that would give us evidence even a conspiracy lawyer couldn't spin. I told Agent Vance I wanted them to come to my house. I'd create a situation where Avery and Julian thought they had to act immediately, before the Wisconsin trip, before I could escape or expose them. I'd make them believe I was about to run, that I'd discovered their secret, and they had one last chance to silence me. Agent Vance listened as I outlined the plan. It was dangerous. It required perfect timing, but it would give us everything we needed, recorded in my own home, where I should have been safe. That evening, I told Avery I'd received a call from my attorney about some irregularities in our joint accounts. I watched her face as I mentioned that my lawyer wanted me to come in tomorrow morning to review suspicious transactions. I said I couldn't understand what he was talking about, but it sounded serious. Something about unauthorized withdrawals and identity verification issues. Avery's face went pale. She asked what kind of irregularities, what specifically the lawyer had mentioned. Her voice remained steady, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. I told her I didn't have details yet, just that the lawyer had sounded concerned and wanted to meet first thing in the morning. She said she needed to make a quick phone call, something about her mother's medication. I knew she was calling Julian. Agent Vance's team had already positioned themselves around my house, cameras in every room, microphones that could pick up whispered conversations through walls, armed agents in unmarked vehicles on every street corner. If Avery and Julian decided to act tonight, we'd capture every second. I went to bed early, telling Avery I was exhausted from work stress. She kissed my forehead and said she'd be up soon. She just needed to finish some emails. I lay in the dark with my eyes closed, wearing the wire the FBI had given me, wondering if tonight would be the night my wife tried to kill me. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. No headlights. I heard the front door open slowly, the lock being manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to bypass our security system. Footsteps on the stairs. Not Avery's footsteps, heavier, masculine. Julian was in my house. I heard them whispering in the hallway outside my bedroom. Avery's voice saying it was too risky. They should wait. Stick to the original plan. Julian's voice insisting that by morning it would be too late, that if my lawyer discovered the fraud trail, they'd both be arrested before they could execute the insurance payout. Julian said something I'll never forget. He told Avery that killing me tonight, in my own bed, would be cleaner than the hunting accident. They could stage it as a home invasion gone wrong. Springfield had crime rates that would support the narrative. He already had an unregistered weapon. They could be in Canada within 8 hours. Avery argued that the life insurance wouldn't pay out for a murder investigation. Julian said it wouldn't matter because they'd already drained enough from my accounts to disappear permanently. The insurance was supposed to be the bonus, but the immediate cash was more important than waiting for the perfect accident. I listened to them debate whether to smother me with a pillow or make it look like I'd fallen down the stairs. I listened to my wife calculate which method would raise fewer questions with investigators. I listened to them discuss killing me with the same tone other couples use to plan dinner reservations. Then I heard the bedroom door open. The lights in my house suddenly blazed on, and federal agents swarmed through every entrance as Julian stood over my bed with a pistol in his hand and Avery beside him, finally wearing her true face. Time fractured. The bedroom flooded with tactical lights so bright they turned night into a bleached-out noon. Julian's face, my face, twisted in shock and rage as red laser dots converged on his chest. The pistol clattered to the floor as agents in FBI vests surged forward, weapons drawn, voices overlapping in commands I couldn't quite process. Avery screamed, not in fear, but in fury, a sound of pure outrage that someone had disrupted her carefully crafted plan. She lunged toward me, and for a split second I thought she was going to attack. But an agent intercepted her, forcing her to the ground with professional efficiency. She was still screaming, words tumbling out in a stream of accusations, claiming I'd set them up, that she was the victim, that Julian had forced her into everything. Julian said nothing. He just stared at me with eyes that were the exact same shade as mine, the same shape, set in a face that could have been my reflection if the mirror had somehow learned to hate. Agent Vance stepped between us and told me to get dressed, that I needed to come to the field office to give a formal statement. I pulled on clothes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I walked past Avery as agents handcuffed her, and she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, begging me to tell them it was a misunderstanding, that Julian had broken into our house without her knowledge, that she'd been trying to protect me. Even now, even caught in the act, she was still performing, still calculating which story might work, which version of herself might earn sympathy. The FBI agent said nothing as they led both of them out of my house. I watched from the front window as separate cars took them away, red and blue lights painting the quiet street in colors of emergency and violation. At the field office, I spent 4 hours recounting everything, from the bank manager's phone call, through every discovery, every lie I'd uncovered, every moment of the past week, living with the knowledge that my wife was planning my murder. Agent Vance recorded it all, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression neutral and professional. Then she showed me what they'd found at Julian's Springfield apartment, a storage unit filled with personal effects from previous victims, Robert's engraved watch, David's college ring, Michael's leather wallet. Trophies, she called them, evidence that Julian kept mementos from each man they'd killed, markers of successful hunts. She showed me driver's licenses for 7 different men spanning 12 years. All of them looked like variations of the same person, like Julian and I had an entire family of identical strangers scattered across the country. Some licenses belonged to men I'd never heard of, men who'd probably died in accidents that never made national news, whose deaths had been ruled misfortune rather than murder. Marcus arrived at the field office with additional evidence he'd compiled, financial records showing that Avery and Julian had worked together for 15 years, not 5. They weren't siblings. They were married, had been since she was 21 and he was 23. They'd started with smaller cons, credit card fraud, and check kiting before evolving to this long-game marriage scheme. They'd refined their method over more than a decade. They'd learned exactly how long to maintain the relationship before extracting assets, exactly how to stage accidents that wouldn't trigger deep investigations, exactly which type of emotionally vulnerable man would trust completely and question nothing. Marcus showed me Avery's real name, Jessica Lynn Morrison. She'd gone through 8 legal name changes, creating a new identity for each new victim. Julian's real name was Trevor Morrison. He'd accumulated 14 false identities, professional-grade forgeries that had fooled banks, government agencies, and everyone who'd tried to verify his existence. Agent Vance explained they were building cases connecting Jessica and Trevor to every one of those 7 men's deaths, plus 3 additional suspicious deaths they were investigating. It would take months to complete the evidence chain, but the recordings from my house alone were enough to charge them with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, bank fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other federal crimes. She told me I'd saved my own life by staying calm, by trusting the process, by not confronting them directly. She said most people in my situation would have panicked, would have tipped them off, would have ended up as victim number 8. I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like someone who'd been living in a horror movie without realizing it, someone who'd kissed a monster goodnight for 5 years and thought it was love. Marcus drove me home at dawn. The house had been processed as a crime scene, plastic evidence markers scattered across the bedroom floor, fingerprint dust on the door frames. I couldn't stay there. The thought of sleeping in that bed, walking those hallways, living in the space where Jessica had pretended to be Avery while planning my execution, I couldn't do it. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel downtown. From the window of the 17th floor, I could see Lake Michigan stretching toward a horizon that looked impossibly distant. I thought about all the mornings I'd woken up believing I'd found happiness again, believing the woman beside me was my second chance at love, believing the universe had finally given me something good after the pain of my divorce. I thought about how close I'd come to dying without ever knowing I'd been murdered, and I realized the scariest part wasn't that Julian had stood over my bed with a gun. It was that part of me still wanted to believe Avery had loved me even a little, even once. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago became my second home for 3 months. Every week brought new hearings, depositions, pre-trial motions filed by defense attorneys trying to suppress evidence or create reasonable doubt. I sat through all of it, watching Jessica and Trevor perform their final roles. They'd hired separate lawyers, each claiming the other had masterminded everything. Jessica's attorney argued she'd been manipulated by Trevor, groomed from a young age into a criminal lifestyle she didn't fully understand. She wept convincingly on the witness stand, describing how Trevor had controlled her through fear and psychological abuse. She claimed she'd wanted to tell me the truth, but was terrified of what Trevor would do to her if she betrayed him. Trevor's lawyer took a different approach. He painted Jessica as the true predator, a sociopath who'd seduced Trevor into helping her murder wealthy men for financial gain. He presented her as the planner, the strategist, the one who selected targets and orchestrated the long-term deceptions. Trevor, his lawyer argued, was just muscle, following orders from the woman he loved. I listened to them blame each other for crimes they'd committed together, watched them perform heartbreak and victimhood, and marveled at how skilled they were at becoming whatever role the moment required. Even now, facing life imprisonment, they couldn't stop running their con. The prosecution built their case methodically. Agent Vance testified about the Springfield surveillance footage showing Jessica and Trevor discussing accelerating my murder. FBI tech specialist testified about the encrypted communications. Marcus presented financial forensics, proving they'd been married for 15 years and operated as a coordinated team. Then came the evidence from previous victims' cases. Robert's sister testified that his girlfriend had disappeared the week after his funeral, leaving no forwarding address or contact information. David's business partner testified about suspicious financial irregularities in the months before David's supposed accidental death. Michael's ex-wife testified that Michael had called her 3 days before he died, saying his new girlfriend was asking strange questions about his assets and insurance policies. The prosecution connected 7 definite cases and was investigating 4 more. Each victim had been a divorced or widowed man in his late 40s or early 50s, financially secure but emotionally vulnerable. Each had died in an accident that conveniently occurred just after their life insurance policies vested. Each had a girlfriend who disappeared immediately after collecting death benefits. The jury looked at Jessica and Trevor with expressions of disgust and disbelief. How do you comprehend people who murder for money with the casualness most people bring to grocery shopping? How do you understand predators who turn intimacy into a weapon? On the 15th day of trial, the prosecution played the recording from my bedroom. The courtroom went silent as Julian's voice, Trevor's voice, discussed whether to smother me or push me down the stairs. Jessica's voice debating which method would create fewer investigative complications. Their voices planning my death with the emotional detachment of mechanics diagnosing car trouble. When the recording ended, several jurors were crying. The judge called a recess. Jessica's lawyer requested a sidebar, and I knew he was going to propose a plea deal. No attorney wants a jury to convict their client after hearing that kind of evidence. Both defendants pleaded guilty to multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder, bank fraud, identity theft, and interstate racketeering. Jessica received 35 years without parole. Trevor received 40 years without parole. The judge added consecutive sentences for the fraud charges, ensuring neither would leave prison until they were elderly themselves, if they lived that long. Before sentencing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I'd prepared something, but when I stood at the podium, Looking at Jessica sitting at the defense table with her head bowed, I couldn't deliver the speech I'd written. Instead, I spoke from somewhere deeper, somewhere that still carried the wound of believing her love had been real. I told the court about the morning coffee she'd brought me every day for 5 years. I told them about the way she'd held my hand during a movie and whispered that she felt safe with me. I told them about the trip to Colorado, where she'd laughed so hard at my terrible jokes that I'd thought I'd finally found someone who understood me. I told them those moments had felt real, had felt like evidence that the universe could be kind, that second chances existed. Then I told them about the night I discovered her timeline document, the moment I understood those 5 years had been a performance, that every smile and touch and whispered endearment had been calculated to make me trust her enough to let her kill me. I told them about lying in bed listening to her discuss whether suffocating me would be quicker than staging a fall down the stairs. I looked directly at Jessica and Trevor and said I didn't hate them because hatred required caring about them as human beings, and I'd realized they weren't human in any way that mattered. They were predators wearing human skin, mimicking intimacy without ever feeling it. They'd stolen 5 years of my life, killed 7 men before me, and destroyed the ability of countless people to trust again. The judge thanked me, pronounced sentence, and I walked out of that courtroom knowing I'd survived, but understanding that part of me had died in that bedroom the moment I heard my wife plan my murder. 6 months after the trial concluded, I stood in my new apartment on the 30th floor of a building overlooking Lake Michigan. The view stretched forever, water meeting sky in a line so distant it seemed like the edge of the world. I'd chosen this place specifically for that view, for the sense that I could see everything coming, that nothing could sneak up behind me anymore. I sold the Oak Park house within 3 weeks of the trial ending. The real estate agent suggested I disclose the property's history, but Illinois law didn't require it for criminal activity that didn't result in a death on premises. Still, I told the buyers everything. They were a young couple from Wisconsin who said they believed in fresh starts and didn't care about the house's past. They paid cash and moved in immediately. I donated every piece of furniture Jessica had chosen. I burned the photos from our wedding. I destroyed everything that carried her fingerprints or her voice or any evidence she'd existed in my life. Some people called it extreme. My therapist, Dr. Raymond Park, called it necessary purging. He said trauma doesn't just live in your head. It lives in objects and spaces, and sometimes you have to burn it out physically before you can heal it mentally. The money Jessica and Trevor stole was never fully recovered. The FBI traced about $30,000 to offshore accounts, but the rest had been converted to cryptocurrency and scattered across digital wallets they'd never revealed. Agent Vance said it was probably sitting in cold storage somewhere, waiting for an associate to claim it years from now. But there was no way to prove it or retrieve it. I'd lost $43,000, 5 years of my life, and the ability to trust my own judgment about people. But I'd kept my life, which was more than Robert, David, Michael, and 4 other men whose names I learned during the trial could say. The FBI closed cases on all 11 victims. 8 confirmed murders staged as accidents. 3 additional deaths they suspected but couldn't prove definitively. 11 families who'd grieved without knowing their loved ones had been hunted, selected specifically for their vulnerability and their assets. I received letters from some of those families. Robert's sister wrote that learning the truth about her brother's death had destroyed the peaceful memory she tried to maintain. But at least now she understood why his girlfriend had seemed so strangely efficient about liquidating his estate. David's business partner wrote that he'd always suspected something was wrong but had talked himself out of investigating because grief clouds judgment. Michael's ex-wife wrote that she felt guilty for not pushing harder when Michael called her with concerns for dismissing his worries as paranoia. I wrote back to all of them. I told them about the timeline document, about listening to Jessica and Trevor debate methods of murder, about surviving by pure chance because a bank manager knew me well enough to call when something seemed wrong. I told them their loved ones had done nothing wrong, had made no mistakes, had simply been unlucky enough to cross paths with predators who'd refined their craft over 15 years. Some days, I still catch myself starting to think about the good moments with Jessica, the breakfast conversations, the shared jokes, the comfortable silences, before I remember those moments were fabricated by someone studying how to kill me convincingly. Dr. Park says this is normal, that your brain wants to believe the lie was partially true because accepting total fabrication is too destabilizing. He says, eventually, I'll stop doing it, stop reaching for memories that never really happened. I changed everything about my life. New apartment, new routines, new social circles. I joined a support group for people who'd survived intimate partner violence, even though I still struggle with calling what Jessica did domestic violence rather than premeditated murder interrupted by luck. The group helped me understand that betrayal doesn't have a minimum threshold, that my trauma was valid even though I'd survived when others hadn't. I started dating again last month, meeting a woman named Elena through mutual friends at a charity fundraiser. She knows my story. Everyone in Chicago's professional community knows my story after the trial coverage, and she's been patient with my hypervigilance about background checks and references and verifying every detail of her past. She says she understands that anyone in my position would be cautious, but I can see the hurt in her eyes when I ask to speak with her ex-husband to confirm details of her divorce. Marcus checks in weekly, usually with texts, asking if I need anything or inviting me to watch football games at his place. Agent Vance called last month to say she's teaching a training course on long-term romantic fraud at the FBI Academy and wants to use my case as the primary study material. I told her I didn't mind, that if my nightmare could help agents recognize these patterns earlier and save other people, then at least something good came from it. I think about Trevor sometimes, about the uncanny experience of confronting someone with my face. Dr. Park says I fixate on that detail because it symbolizes the complete violation of my identity, the way they didn't just steal my money, but tried to steal my entire existence, to replace me with a version they could control and eventually erase. He's probably right. The thought that there was someone out there practicing being me, wearing clothes like mine, studying my mannerisms, preparing to step into my life after I was dead, it still makes my skin crawl. The apartment is quiet now, deliberately so. I don't play music. I don't have a television. I've learned to appreciate silence, to find comfort in the absence of surprise. My consulting firm thrived despite the trial publicity, or maybe because of it, and I've been managing major accounts again, rebuilding the professional reputation I thought was finished. But I'm different now. I second-guess every instinct. I question every kindness. When someone smiles at me, I wonder what they want. When a client compliments my work, I analyze their motivations. Dr. Park says this hypervigilance will fade with time, that my nervous system will eventually recalibrate to understand I'm safe now. I'm not sure I believe him. Standing at this window 30 floors above the street, watching the lake spread toward the horizon, I think about all the versions of myself that existed throughout this ordeal. The trusting man who believed in second chances, the investigator who uncovered the truth, the bait who wore a wire in his own bedroom, the survivor who testified in court, the ghost who burned his old life and started over. I don't know which one is the real Nathan Briggs anymore. Maybe all of them, maybe none of them. Maybe the real version died the night I heard my wife plan my murder, and everything since has been improvisation. A man playing the role of someone who survived. But I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I'm still watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan every morning, still drinking coffee on this balcony, still choosing to believe that not everyone is a predator, that not every smile is a mask, that somewhere in this damaged world there's still something real worth trusting. Jessica and Trevor are in federal prisons in different states, serving sentences that will consume the rest of their functional lives. They'll die behind bars, their faces aging into caricatures of the people they pretended to be, their cons finally running out of time. And I'm here, 30 floors up, looking at a view that stretches forever, understanding that I survived not because I was smarter or stronger, but because a bank manager knew me well enough to make one phone call that changed everything. So if you're watching this from somewhere safe, remember Sarah from National Bank. Remember that sometimes salvation comes from the smallest acts of attention, from someone caring enough to call when something feels wrong. Where are you watching from? What's your story? Leave a comment. Share this if it moved you. And remember, trust your instincts, but verify everything. They might just save your life. And please hit that subscribe button. I'll be sharing more stories like this, real voices from real people, because the truth is stranger and more important than any fiction we could write.